park ranger evicts lone wolf, the shocking truth about their past unfolds. The old cabin nestled amongst the pines creaked a lonely tune as the wind whipped through the valley. John, a man weathered by time and solitude, sat by the crackling fireplace, a steaming mug warming his rough hands. His face, etched with the lines of a life lived in the wilderness, held a quiet sadness, a reflection of the years that had passed since his wife, Mary, had succumbed to illness. He had retreated to this secluded haven after her passing, seeking solace in the embrace of nature, far from the clamor of civilization. The silence of the mountains was a balm to his soul, the whispering pines a constant companion. Days were spent tending to his small vegetable garden, chopping wood for the long winter months, and exploring the winding trails that snaked through the dense forest. John had always been a man of few words, content in his own company, finding comfort in the rhythm of the natural world. He possessed a deep respect for the creatures that shared his mountain home, observing their habits, understanding their ways. The deer that grazed in the meadow, the hawks that soared overhead, the squirrels that scampered amongst the trees. They were all part of the tapestry of life that surrounded him. One crisp autumn afternoon, as John ventured deeper into the woods than usual, a faint whimpering caught his attention. He followed the sound, his curiosity piqued, until he stumbled upon a sight that tugged at his heartstrings. Curled beneath a fallen log, shivering and weak, were 3 wolf cubs, their eyes barely open. Their mother was nowhere to be seen. John's heart ached for the helpless creatures. He knew the harsh realities of the wild, the unforgiving nature of predators and prey. Leaving them to fend for themselves would be a death sentence. Yet, taking them in would be a daunting task, a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. He knelt beside the cubs, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold. Their soft whimpers pierced the silence, pleading for help. John, a man who had known loss and loneliness, couldn't bear to turn away. With a sigh, he gently scooped them into his arms, their warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the forest floor. As he carried them back to his cabin, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps these vulnerable creatures, these wild spirits, could fill the void that had lingered in his life since Mary's passing. Perhaps they could offer him a renewed sense of purpose, a reason to embrace life once more. The cabin, usually filled with a comforting silence, was now alive with the soft whimpers and rustles of the wolf cubs. John, a man who had grown accustomed to solitude, found himself thrust into the role of caretaker, a responsibility he hadn't anticipated but embraced nonetheless. He fashioned a makeshift den for the cubs near the fireplace, lining it with old blankets and soft furs. He warmed milk, carefully feeding them drop by drop, marveling at their eagerness to survive. The cubs, 2 males and a female, were a constant source of fascination. John, with a newfound sense of purpose, spent hours observing them, learning their personalities. The largest of the males, whom he named Rocky, was bold and adventurous, always the first to explore his surroundings. The second male, shy and gentle, he called Shadow, for he often stayed hidden in the shadows, observing his siblings with cautious eyes. The female, Luna, was the smallest but the fiercest, her tiny growls and playful nips a testament to her spirit. As the weeks turned into months, the cubs thrived under John's care. They grew rapidly, their playful wrestling matches and clumsy attempts to climb over each other filling the cabin with a vibrancy it hadn't known in years. John, in turn, found himself transformed. The lines of sadness on his face softened, replaced by a gentle smile. The silence that had once been a comfort was now filled with the joyful sounds of the cubs, their presence a constant reminder of life's resilience. He taught them to follow his commands, to sit and stay, to come when called. He took them on short walks in the woods, watching them explore their natural habitat with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He knew the day would come when they would have to return to the wild, but the thought of parting with them filled him with a deep sense of loss. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley, John sat on the porch, the cubs curled up at his feet. He stroked their fur, his heart heavy with the realization that their time together was drawing to a close. He had nurtured them, protected them, loved them as his own. But they belonged to the wild, to the freedom of the forest. The next morning, with a heavy heart, John led the wolves to the edge of the woods. He watched as they hesitated, their instincts pulling them towards the familiar scents and sounds of the forest, yet their bond with him keeping them close. With a final pat on their heads, he gave the command to go. His voice choked with emotion. The wolves disappeared into the undergrowth, their forms quickly swallowed by the dense foliage. John stood there for a long time, listening to the fading sounds of their movements, the silence of their absence weighing heavily upon him. He returned to the cabin, the emptiness echoing the void in his heart. Years passed. Seasons changed, painting the mountains in vibrant hues of gold and crimson, then blanketing them in a pristine white. John, his hair now streaked with silver, continued his solitary existence, the memory of the wolf cubs a bittersweet ache in his heart. He had occasionally glimpsed them in the distance, fleeting shadows disappearing into the undergrowth, but any attempt to approach them was met with wary avoidance. They were wild creatures now, their instincts honed for survival, their bond with him a distant echo of their cubhood. One cool spring morning, a knock on his cabin door broke the usual tranquility. A young woman, her face flushed with exertion, stood on his porch, her backpack slung over her shoulder. She introduced herself as Sarah, a wildlife biologist studying the wolf packs in the area. She had heard rumors of a man who had raised wolf cubs years ago and was hoping to gather information about their behavior. John, initially hesitant to share his story, found himself drawn to Sarah's enthusiasm and her genuine passion for the wolves. He invited her in, sharing his experiences with the cubs, the joy and the sorrow, the bond that had transcended their differences. Sarah listened intently, her eyes sparkling with interest. She explained her research, her efforts to understand the complex social dynamics of the pack, their hunting patterns, their territorial boundaries. As they talked, John learned that the local pack was thriving, their numbers steadily increasing. Sarah believed they were led by a particularly intelligent and strong alpha male, a wolf she had nicknamed Ghost for his elusive nature and uncanny ability to avoid human contact. A flicker of hope ignited within John. Could Ghost be Rocky, the bold and adventurous cub he had raised? The thought sent a surge of excitement through him, a longing to reconnect with the creature he had once cared for. Sarah, sensing his eagerness, invited him to join her on her next observation trip. John, hesitant at first, his years of solitude making him wary of human interaction, eventually agreed. The next morning they set out, following a narrow trail that led deep into the wolves' territory. Sarah, equipped with binoculars and a notebook, pointed out signs of the pack's presence: tracks in the mud, scat markings on trees, the remnants of a recent kill. They settled behind a thicket of bushes, their movements slow and deliberate, careful not to disturb the wolves. Hours passed, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird song. Just as John was beginning to lose hope, a movement in the distance caught his eye. A large gray wolf emerged from the trees, its coat gleaming in the sunlight. It was followed by several others, their movements fluid and graceful, their eyes scanning the surroundings with an alertness that spoke of their wild nature. John's heart pounded in his chest. He recognized the distinctive markings on the alpha male's fur, the slightly crooked left ear, the scar above its right eye. It was Rocky, his Rocky, now a magnificent leader of his pack. Tears welled up in his eyes as he watched the wolf he had raised years ago, now a powerful creature of the wild, living the life he was meant to live. The sight of Rocky, now the majestic alpha male Ghost, stirred a whirlwind of emotions within John. Pride swelled in his chest, witnessing the once vulnerable cub leading his pack with such strength and confidence. But there was also a pang of sadness, a reminder of the years they had spent apart, the bond that had faded with time. Yet, in that moment, observing Ghost in his element, John felt a profound sense of peace. He had given this creature a chance at life, and that life had blossomed into something truly magnificent. Over the next few weeks, John accompanied Sarah on several more observation trips. He learned the names of the other wolves in the pack, their relationships to each other, their individual personalities. He witnessed their hunting strategies, their playful interactions, their fierce loyalty to their alpha. He felt a deep connection to these creatures, a sense of kinship that transcended language and species. One day, as they were tracking the pack through the dense forest, they stumbled upon a scene that chilled them to the bone. A group of poachers, armed with rifles and traps, had encroached upon the wolves' territory. John's heart sank as he realized the danger the pack was in. These men, driven by greed and disregard for wildlife, posed a serious threat to the wolves' survival. Sarah, her face pale with anger and fear, whispered to John, "We need to get help. These men are ruthless. They won't hesitate to kill the entire pack." But John, his protective instincts taking over, couldn't bear the thought of abandoning the wolves to their fate. He remembered the helpless cubs he had rescued years ago, the trust they had placed in him. He couldn't let them down now. "You go," he urged Sarah. "Get to the nearest ranger station and report this. I'll stay here and try to distract them." Sarah, hesitant at first, knew that time was of the essence. She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude and concern, and quickly disappeared into the undergrowth. John, his heart pounding in his chest, watched as the poachers set their traps, their laughter echoing through the trees, oblivious to his presence. He knew he had to act fast. He crept closer, his movements silent and deliberate, his mind racing with a plan. He remembered the lessons he had learned from the wolves themselves, their cunning, their ability to use the terrain to their advantage. He would use their own tactics against the poachers. As the men moved deeper into the forest, John began to create diversions. He snapped branches, threw rocks, imitated the calls of owls and coyotes, creating an illusion of multiple threats surrounding them. The poachers, their confidence shaken, became increasingly wary, their focus shifting from hunting wolves to protecting themselves. John, using the cover of the dense foliage, led them on a wild goose chase, drawing them further and further away from the wolves' den. He knew he was taking a huge risk, but the thought of the wolves falling victim to these cruel men fueled his determination. He would protect them even if it meant putting his own life on the line. The forest floor became a battleground of wits. John, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest, used every trick he knew to keep the poachers disoriented and off balance. He mimicked the sounds of snapping twigs, the rustle of leaves, the hoots of an owl, creating an illusion of an unseen presence surrounding them. The poachers, their bravado fading with each passing hour, grew increasingly nervous, their eyes darting around, their rifles held at the ready. John, adrenaline coursing through his veins, pushed his aging body to its limits. He scrambled through the undergrowth, his movements guided by instinct and a deep-rooted knowledge of the forest. He knew these woods like the back of his hand, every hidden path, every rocky outcrop, every dense thicket providing him with cover. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the forest floor, John led the poachers towards a treacherous ravine, its edges concealed by a thick blanket of moss. He knew this area well, a place he often visited to admire the cascading waterfall that plunged into the depths below. Now, this place of beauty would become a trap. With a final, calculated move, John sent a large rock tumbling down the slope, its echoing crash shattering the silence of the forest. The poachers, startled by the sudden noise, turned towards the sound, their footsteps leading them closer to the edge of the ravine. One of the men, his senses heightened by fear, stepped onto the mossy edge. The ground gave way beneath his weight, sending him tumbling into the abyss. His cries of alarm echoed through the trees, followed by a sickening thud. The other poachers, their faces pale with terror, scrambled back from the edge, their bravado completely shattered. John, watching from the shadows, knew he had succeeded in turning the tables. The poachers, their leader gone and their confidence broken, were now more concerned with their own survival than with hunting wolves. He seized the opportunity, his voice ringing out through the trees. "This is your last chance. Leave this forest now, or face the consequences." The remaining poachers, their eyes wide with fear, needed no further encouragement. They turned and fled, their footsteps pounding a hasty retreat through the undergrowth. John, his body trembling with exhaustion, watched them go, a sense of relief washing over him. He had saved the wolves, his wolf cubs, from a terrible fate. As darkness enveloped the forest, John made his way back towards the wolves' den. He was weary, his muscles aching, his clothes torn and dirty, but his heart was filled with a quiet satisfaction. He had faced danger head-on, and he had emerged victorious. He found the pack gathered near the den, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Ghost, his alpha male, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on John. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not a growl of aggression, but a growl of recognition, of gratitude. John knelt down, his hand outstretched. Ghost approached cautiously, his head lowered, then nudged John's hand with his snout. A wave of emotion washed over John as he felt the familiar touch. The bond between them rekindled. The other wolves gathered around, their tails wagging, their eyes filled with a curious warmth. John, surrounded by the creatures he had saved, felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. He was no longer just a solitary man living in the wilderness. He was a part of something bigger, a part of the pack. News of the poaching incident reached the local authorities, and soon, a team of rangers arrived to investigate. Sarah, who had managed to reach the ranger station after a grueling trek through the forest, guided them to the scene. The sight of the poachers' abandoned equipment and the discovery of their fallen comrade sent a shockwave through the community. The brazen attempt to poach endangered wolves within the protected wilderness sparked outrage and a renewed commitment to conservation efforts. John, hailed as a local hero, found himself thrust into the spotlight. His bravery in confronting the poachers and protecting the wolves earned him the respect and admiration of the community. He was invited to speak at town hall meetings, sharing his story, advocating for the preservation of the wilderness and its inhabitants. But John, a man who cherished his solitude, remained uncomfortable with the attention. He preferred the company of the wolves, the quiet understanding they shared. He continued to accompany Sarah on her research trips, his knowledge of the wolves' behavior proving invaluable to her work. One evening, as they sat by a campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces, Sarah turned to John, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You know," she said, "you've not only saved the wolves, you've saved a part of ourselves. You've reminded us of the bond we share with nature, the responsibility we have to protect it." John, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, nodded slowly. He had never sought recognition or reward. His actions were driven by a deep-seated love for the creatures he had come to call family. The wolves, in turn, had shown him the true meaning of loyalty, of gratitude, of the enduring power of connection. As the years passed, John's story became a local legend, a tale whispered around campfires, a reminder of the courage and compassion that resided within the human spirit. The wolves continued to thrive, their presence a testament to the man who had risked his life to protect them. And John, the solitary man who had found solace in the wilderness, discovered a deeper connection, a sense of belonging that transcended the boundaries of species, a bond forged in the heart of the wild. Life in the mountain cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. John, though older now, his movements a bit slower, his joints a bit stiffer, still rose with the sun. His days filled with the familiar routines of tending his garden, chopping wood, and exploring the well-worn paths of the forest. But now, his solitude was often punctuated by visits from Sarah and her team of researchers. Their conversations filled with the latest observations of the wolf pack, the births of new cubs, the shifting dynamics of the pack hierarchy. John, with his intimate knowledge of the wolves, became an invaluable asset to their research. He could identify individual wolves by their markings, their gait, their personalities. He could anticipate their movements, predict their hunting patterns, understand their intricate communication. He had become, in a sense, a bridge between the human and wolf worlds, a translator of their wild language. One crisp autumn afternoon, as John sat on his porch, watching the leaves fall like golden rain from the trees, a familiar figure emerged from the woods. Ghost, his coat now tinged with gray, his movements a bit slower than in his prime, approached the cabin with a hesitant gait. Behind him, a young female wolf limped, her leg clearly injured. John's heart ached at the sight of the injured wolf. He recognized her as Luna's daughter, a playful and spirited creature he had often observed from afar. He beckoned them closer, his voice soft and reassuring. Ghost, his trust in John unwavering, led the young wolf towards the porch. John, with gentle hands, examined the injured leg. It was clear that the wolf had been caught in a trap, the metal jaws leaving a deep gash. He knew he had to act quickly to prevent infection and further damage. He retrieved his first aid kit, his hands surprisingly steady as he cleaned the wound and applied a makeshift bandage. The young wolf, whimpering softly, allowed John to tend to her injury. Ghost, his watchful eyes never leaving John's face, stood guard, his presence a silent testament to the bond they shared. As John worked, he couldn't help but marvel at the trust these wild creatures placed in him, the unspoken understanding that transcended their differences. Over the next few weeks, John cared for the injured wolf, changing her bandages, providing her with food and water, and ensuring she rested. He named her Hope, a symbol of her resilience and the enduring connection between them. Ghost remained by her side, his loyalty and protectiveness unwavering. As Hope slowly regained her strength, John would take her on short walks in the woods, supporting her weight as she limped along. He would tell her stories of her mother, Luna, of her uncles, Rocky and Shadow, of the pack's history, their triumphs and struggles. One day, as they walked through a sun-dappled clearing, Hope suddenly stopped, her ears perked, her nose twitching. She let out a soft whine, her gaze fixed on the treeline. John, following her gaze, saw a group of wolves emerge from the shadows. It was the pack, led by Ghost's eldest son, now the alpha male. Hope, her tail wagging excitedly, limped towards her family, her whines turning into joyful yelps. The pack greeted her with enthusiastic licks and nuzzles, their reunion a heartwarming spectacle of love and acceptance. Ghost, his eyes filled with pride, watched as his daughter rejoined her pack, her injury healed, her spirit unbroken. As the pack disappeared into the woods, John stood alone in the clearing, a tear rolling down his cheek. He had witnessed the cycle of life, the passing of generations, the enduring strength of family bonds. He had played a small part in their story, a testament to the profound connection between humans and the wild, a connection that had enriched his life in ways he could never have imagined. Winter descended upon the mountains, blanketing the landscape in a pristine white. The cabin, nestled amongst the snow-laden pines, creaked and groaned under the weight of the icy winds. John, his age now catching up with him, found his movements slower, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he chopped wood for the fireplace. The solitude, once a comforting embrace, now felt heavier, the silence echoing the growing emptiness within him. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, John felt a sharp pain in his chest, a tightness that made it difficult to breathe. He stumbled towards his bed, his body racked with chills, his mind filled with a growing sense of dread. He knew this was more than just a winter cold. This was a call from the depths of his being, a reminder of his mortality. As the night wore on, John's condition worsened. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever rising, his dreams filled with images of Mary, of the wolf cubs, of the life he had lived in the wilderness. He thought of Sarah, of the rangers, of the community that had embraced him, but he knew they were too far away, the blizzard making any attempt to reach him impossible. In the early hours of the morning, as the storm reached its peak, John felt a presence near him. He opened his eyes, his vision blurred, and saw a figure standing by his bedside. It was Ghost, his fur covered in snow, his eyes filled with a deep concern. Behind him, several other wolves, including Hope, stood watch, their presence filling the cabin with a warmth that defied the icy grip of the blizzard. John, his heart filled with a strange peace, reached out a trembling hand. Ghost approached, his snout nudging John's palm, his warm breath a comforting presence. John closed his eyes, a smile gracing his lips. He was not alone. He was surrounded by his family, the creatures he had loved and protected, the creatures who had, in turn, shown him the true meaning of loyalty and companionship. As the first rays of dawn broke through the storm clouds, John took his last breath, his hand resting gently on Ghost's fur. The wolves remained by his side, their mournful howls echoing through the silent cabin, a final farewell to the man who had shared his life, his heart, his home with them. When the storm finally subsided, and Sarah and the rangers were able to reach the cabin, they found John lying peacefully in his bed, a serene smile on his face. The wolves were gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of their presence, a testament to the bond they had shared with the man who had saved them, the man who had become a part of their pack. John's story became a cherished legend, a tale of kindness, courage, and the enduring connection between humans and the wild. His legacy lived on in the thriving wolf pack, in the protected wilderness, and in the hearts of those who knew him. He was the man who had saved the wolves, and in doing so had found his own redemption, his own sense of belonging in the heart of the wild. The passing of John, the solitary guardian of the mountain, cast a somber pall over the valley. Sarah and her team, upon discovering his lifeless form amidst the silent vigil of the wolves, felt a profound sense of loss. They mourned not just a valuable colleague, but a friend, a mentor, a man who had opened their eyes to the intricate beauty and delicate balance of the wilderness. News of his death spread through the small mountain community, bringing with it a shared grief. The townsfolk, who had once viewed John as a recluse, now recognized him as a hero, a protector of the wild, a man who had lived a life of quiet dignity and unwavering compassion. They organized a memorial service, a gathering of those whose lives he had touched, sharing stories of his kindness, his wisdom, his deep connection to the land and its creatures. The service was held in a clearing amidst the towering pines, a place where John had often wandered, observing the wildlife, finding solace in the embrace of nature. Sarah spoke of his dedication to the wolves, his invaluable contribution to their research, his unwavering belief in the importance of conservation. The rangers recounted his bravery in confronting the poachers, his selfless act of protecting the pack. And the townsfolk, their voices filled with respect and admiration, shared anecdotes of his quiet generosity, his willingness to lend a helping hand, his deep understanding of the natural world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, a lone wolf emerged from the trees. It was Ghost, his coat now grizzled with age, his eyes bearing the weight of sorrow. He approached the gathering, his movements slow and deliberate, his presence a poignant reminder of the bond he had shared with John. A hush fell over the crowd as Ghost stood before them, his head held high, his gaze sweeping across the faces of those who had gathered to honor his human companion. Then, with a mournful howl that echoed through the valley, he turned and disappeared into the deepening twilight, carrying with him the spirit of the man who had loved him, the man who had become a part of his pack. In the years that followed, John's cabin remained untouched, a silent monument to his life. The garden he had tended with such care was reclaimed by the wilderness, the flowers and vegetables giving way to wild grasses and shrubs. But his spirit lived on in the rustling leaves, the whispering pines, the flowing streams, the creatures that roamed the land he had called home. The wolf pack continued to thrive, their numbers growing, their territory expanding. They became a symbol of resilience, of the enduring power of nature, a living testament to the man who had saved them, the man who had shown them kindness and compassion. And every now and then, as the moon bathed the mountains in its silvery glow, a lone wolf would emerge from the shadows, its howl echoing through the valley, a tribute to the man who had loved the wild, the man who had found his true home in the heart of the wilderness. John's story became a cherished part of the local lore, a tale whispered around campfires, a reminder of the profound connection between humans and animals, the power of compassion, the enduring legacy of a life lived in harmony with nature. He was the man who had saved the wolves, and in doing so had found his own salvation, his own place in the grand tapestry of life. Sarah, driven by a profound sense of purpose after John's passing, dedicated her life to continuing his work. She expanded her research, tirelessly advocating for the protection of the wolves and their habitat. She became a renowned voice in the field of wildlife conservation, her work inspiring a new generation of scientists and activists. She often returned to John's cabin, now a place of pilgrimage, a sanctuary where she could reconnect with the spirit of her mentor. She would sit on the porch, listening to the whispering pines, imagining John's presence beside her, sharing his insights, his quiet wisdom. One day, as she sat there, lost in thought, she noticed a small, worn book tucked beneath a loose floorboard. It was John's journal, filled with his observations of the wolves, his reflections on life in the wilderness, his innermost thoughts and feelings. Sarah carefully turned the pages, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and joy. She read about John's early days in the cabin, his struggles with loneliness and grief, his growing bond with the wolf cubs. She discovered his fears, his hopes, his dreams, his deep love for the creatures he had come to call family. As she read, she felt a profound connection to John, a deeper understanding of the man who had touched her life in so many ways. She realized that his legacy was not just about the wolves, but about the enduring power of compassion, the importance of living in harmony with nature, the profound impact a single individual can have on the world. Inspired by John's words, Sarah established a foundation in his name, dedicated to educating the public about wolves, promoting conservation efforts, and fostering a deeper appreciation for the wilderness. She organized workshops, gave lectures, and published articles, sharing John's story, his wisdom, his unwavering belief in the interconnectedness of all living things. Years turned into decades, and the story of John and the wolves became an integral part of the local culture. Children grew up hearing tales of the solitary man who had befriended the wild creatures, the man who had taught them about courage, kindness, and the importance of protecting the natural world. The valley, once threatened by human encroachment, became a sanctuary for wildlife, a place where wolves roamed freely, their howls echoing through the mountains, a constant reminder of the man who had loved them, the man who had become a part of their pack, the man whose spirit lived on in the heart of the wilderness.